Just a note that this podcast may touch on difficult themes and include some challenging conversations, so please take care when listening. This is The Widow Diaries, a podcast that holds space for the often unspoken stories of grief, love and life after loss as a young widow. I'm Caroline Winter, and like so many, I've been on this journey. So come with me each episode and hear from others who've also walked the winding path of widowhood in their own way. The Widow Diaries, for First Light Widowed support, where no story is the same and every story matters. There's something that shifts when your personal story and your professional world begin to overlap. As a journalist, I've spent years telling other people's stories, asking questions, holding space and making sense of complex experiences. But after losing Richard, those conversations feel different. This podcast is part of that, not just telling stories of grief and life after loss, but sitting inside them too, as someone who understands it from the inside out. And sometimes what you've lived through becomes part of what you go on to do. Annabelle Wilson knows that well. Her life is connected to military service and to the realities that come with loving someone in uniform. After losing her husband Josh, she found herself navigating widowhood, new motherhood and the slow, often uncertain process of rebuilding life. Today, as the Veteran Family Commissioner, she brings both her lived experience and her professional voice into a role that advocates for families just like hers. Annabelle, thank you for being on The Widow Diaries.
Thank you for having me. Lovely to be here.
Now, Annabelle, can you take us back to meeting Josh? What do you remember about the beginning of your story together?
Yeah, I do remember. I actually remember the exact moment. I was at a party on the Air Force Base. Josh had just returned from a deployment to Afghanistan. There was this party that neither of us had planned to go to. We were both sort of last-minute ring-ins. And I remember, I can still close my eyes, remember the first time I saw him. And I just sort of knew he was my person. And, you know, we found out sort of like he was winking at me from across the room, that kind of thing. And I remember he sort of came and sat down when we were sort of all sat down to eat. And we did talk in the meantime, but the joke was always, because he leaned across and sort of whispered in my ear, "Are you going to eat that?" So we always used to say all the way through that his pickup line was, "Are you going to eat that?"
What a beautiful memory, and yes, one that clearly you wouldn't have forgotten. What happened after that?
Yes. So he was Newcastle based, I was Melbourne based, and we just sort of did the long distance thing. I think it was really interesting because, you know, he had to come clean that he'd just been diagnosed with brain cancer. And, you know, there was that and, you know, the long distance stuff and everything, you know, it just never felt hard. You know, it was one of those things where we just kind of, it was like, well, we're working backwards from we're working backwards from the fact that we're together. And we sort of just weathered it all. So yeah, we kind of just got stuck in. It was easy despite everything. It was amazing.
That's really interesting. And finding out such heavy news at the start of a relationship, how did that perhaps deepen things for you?
Well, I was 19, so very unworldly. I think I look back and you know, he was at this vet. He'd just come back from deployment. Like I said, he was this incredibly vivacious dude. He was the type of person that after he'd had brain surgery, which was just before I'd met him, he then went with his uncle to New Zealand, and they went bungee jumping. And when I asked him about, you know, his brain surgery and the scar and everything, he's like, well, I wore a hat. And that was the sort of type of person that he was. Like, he came with this big news, but he didn't wear it at all. Like, it didn't seem like that was anything. And he was going through treatment, so he was halfway through a course of radiotherapy, but he used to say he got in just before he lost his hair. So when I met him, he looked $1,000,000, and I guess for me, not knowing what it feels like to be with someone who, I suppose, then started to wear it, and this was years down the line, 10 years down the line, and not knowing what it felt like to be, to have someone be a core part of like your soulmate and then lose them and all of that. Not that I would do anything differently now, but I think I was just like, I look back on 19-year-old me and I was just like, okay, that's something interesting about you, So it's interesting how kind of almost blasé I was about it at the time. I think it was just that I just knew he was my person. Like I just knew, and it was like, well, whatever you come with, whatever baggage that looks like, I don't like Brussels sprouts. Like that's my baggage. You've got cancer. That's your baggage. It just sort of didn't seem like a massive thing at the time.
Yeah, it's a beautiful acceptance of someone, really, isn't it? At that point in life.
Maybe it's the naivety of youth. I don't know.
Yeah, we could all do with a bit more of that sometimes. Sometimes, that's for sure. Look, as well as being, starting this new relationship with, brain cancer as part of that, you also were plunged into military life, weren't you? Something that you had a little bit of familiarity with, though.
I was, I'd sort of had a tiny bit, but not a huge amount of understanding of what it felt like to be a military spouse. We did what a lot of military couples do, which is, there's an acronym for it, which is URF, unaccompanied resident family. There's an acronym for everything in the military. That was one thing I learned. And so, a lot of military families live separately and do long distance. And that's what we did. I mean, for me, I was, I had my own life in Melbourne. I wasn't going to move and then have him post somewhere else and then have to follow him somewhere else. But I guess I was so proud of him and his service and what he achieved. Once he was diagnosed, he was then considered non-deployable. So he wasn't going to go back to Afghanistan or overseas, but he did so much good from home from what he'd learnt while deployed. He won a silver commendation when he was non-deployable for the work that he was doing, and he was still contributing so much and doing incredible things. So I think that was, for me, there was a huge amount of pride in that and a huge understanding of what the military experience was for families.
It obviously gave you a really good grounding in military, and from what I understand, Josh was deeply committed obviously to service but also to family. What was it that made him who he was?
I think, look, he's got an incredible family, and we're still tight to this day, super close. And I think that's been the foundation of, I suppose, now looking back on everything, or the decisions that I'm making now, it's done through that lens of understanding that family was the most important thing to him. I think, when you are in the military and you're living generally away from family and sometimes friends, that becomes even more crucial. It's an interesting life when I'm still very close with a lot of the RAF friends as well. Someone will have, like, I remember when I had my baby shower, they all came just for the afternoon, flew in from all around the country,
wow.
Just for the afternoon and then went back. We do that often. Like, someone will have a birthday and you'll go to it wherever it is in the country. I think there's this real understanding of the fact that the time that you spend with the people that you love is fundamentally important. And I think that's set him up for being, I suppose, handling his diagnosis and the cancer and everything that he went through the way he did. He just handled it so beautifully.
We'll talk a bit more about that in just a moment. I'm keen to know, before his illness though, what sort of future were you building together? Had you spoken about that?
Look, I think, he was always a realist. He was always an optimist, and, his oncologist used to call it optimistic realism or realistic optimism. It's sort of like plan for the worst, hope for the best kind of thing. And I think as time went on, he'd say that his use by date had become his best before date. So that, he got given 12 to 18 months to live if he was lucky. He lived for 10 years. And so
Wow.
it was interesting for us as, he was 22 when he was diagnosed. And as I said, I was 19. And so, we started to build this life together that was like, we'll travel all the time and we'll do all of this, fun stuff and, and really maximize the time that we've got together and just enjoy ourselves. That then becomes a different kind of experience when somebody can, when 12 to 18 months becomes longer and longer and longer. And so, we still did that sort of like we traveled every year. That was a massive thing for us. And, always spent time with family and prioritize our friends and, experiences. But then you sort of also have to be a little bit more realistic about money.
Yeah.
And planning for the future and things like that. So I think, for us, it was always, our goalposts shifted as time went on. I think when we first met, I don't think he had any plans to have kids. I don't think that was ever on the cards. But then as time went on, and it was like, I think, he used to say, like, whenever you see like cancer graphs and things, and there's always that one outlier statistic or that one dot on the graph that's like right up, outside of the bounds. And he used to be like, that's me, like, I'm going to be fine. And so as time went on and that became more, the best before, and we more and more were like, okay, well, we're not going to let cancer dictate our trajectory anymore. We're gonna just live our lives. And then, so we made the decision to have our daughter. We had to do that via IVF because he'd sort of been off and on chemo so much, and he'd banked sperm back in the day, and that was a choice and an option that was available to us. And so our goalposts definitely shifted over our lives from sort of those teenage years or early 20s years of just like going out and just grabbing life by the reins and just going at it, to really going, no, actually, this is something this is going to last forever, and this is a long-term thing, and we're going to start planning for the future. Always with that realism in the background, I suppose, which is something that's a reality for a lot of people living with terminal cancer.
It's a fascinating way to approach something like this, isn't it? Because as you point out, you were at that sort of special time in your life, late teens, early 20s, when everyone's just finding themselves, but then dealing with this kind of really big question and this really big thing that was sort of hanging out there. How do you approach it? So well done to you both, because that couldn't have been easy at times. And I imagine, was there a anticipatory grief, while still trying to live life in motion?
It's interesting. There's part of me that wishes there was a little more of that, maybe. I don't know. It's always hard to know. There's no rule book, is there? And we all sort of deal with it in different ways. It's interesting. I was chatting to a friend about this on the weekend, because I just had Anzac Day, obviously, and so it always brings up things. And she said he lived his whole life, like, in the time that he had. And it was, I really followed his lead on that. We did talk about, I remember we sort of, one afternoon we decided, at some point we decided we were going to do our wills and power of attorneys and all of those like documents and stuff like that. And we took a day, and we spent the afternoon like in a coffee shop as part of this process, going through the what ifs. Like, what if the worst happens for both of us, for both him and for me? So we really went through decisions about cremation and all of this sort of stuff. And I feel really grateful that I had the opportunity to do that with him, because it meant that decision making was very straightforward when it all came to a head. But I really, really just followed his lead. He was the one who was so incredibly, just so incredibly reflective, and he was curious about what he was going through, and he was almost joyous in the sense that he used to say, you have to have a sense of humour about these things. And he really found the joy and the curiosity in what had been handed to him. And he'd already, like I said, he'd already been in a war zone and done all of these things by that time too. So he'd really had this incredible grounded view of the world, and I just sort of followed it.
Yeah, wow. You mentioned that you had decided, let's do this, let's have a baby. Tell me about how that unfolded and, how that crossed over with losing Josh, which
It was,
you couldn't write about, really, could you?
No, it was, I think, look, I actually remember when we decided, I remember being a little bit like, oh, there's no trumpets or fanfare. We're like, let's do this. We're going to do it. I remember the conversation where we were like, nah, we're going to do this. We want to. Yeah, I was kind of like, oh, that was a bit anticlimactic. Like now we just keep going. Like nothing actually else really happened. We did end up, like I said, we did IVF, which in many ways with everything else, I've never really unpacked that. The trauma associated with that, which anyone who's been through the process will know, daily needles and appointments and, your body goes through hell and the egg collection and everything. So we did all of that. And in many ways, after Josh being the centre of attention with medical stuff, it was quite a flip to me. And, he was really beautifully caring in a lot of those scenarios. And I think that dynamic really brought us closer together and helped us, when he got even sicker, he'd supported me so incredibly when I was going through IVF. And I mean, the egg collection really, I really struggled through that in terms of pain and things like that. But getting pregnant part was not the challenge for us. That was that we were super lucky that we got pregnant on the first go.
Wow.
Because it's expensive enough.
Yeah.
And I really feel for people who have to go through it long term because that was hard enough for us. So we did that, and then he was 100% healthy, the Josh that we all and I guess throughout the previous 10 years, he'd had a couple of surgeries and a seizure or two in between, which he would call a tune-up and oil change. So he'd go in, he'd have brain surgery.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, it's the most invasive thing you can do, but, to him it was a tune-up and oil change. And we'd get back on with it. So it's not to say that we hadn't had hiccups along the way, but he was incredible. Like he was like firing on all cylinders when we started to go down this process of IVF, and then I got pregnant, and then it was, his oncologist described it as like, you take one apple out from the bottom of the apple cart and everything just falls. He bent down one morning, he was sitting down, he bent over to do up his shoelace and fell off the chair that he was sitting on. And it was from that moment, it was 3 months between that and him dying.
Wow. Whoa.
So it was all of a sudden. And so I guess, and when he died, I was still pregnant. I was 7.5 months pregnant. So all of this happened it was all going fine, and then it was just not anymore. So that was I suppose for me and for us, that was, I guess, I don't know if any of people listening have had an experience with someone who's died from some sort of acquired brain injury, but it seemed to me that his brain was protecting himself from the reality of what was, I suppose, happening. We were able to talk about Primrose a lot in the hospital. He came to an ultrasound appointment, busted him out of hospital and took him to an ultrasound appointment one of the days, and he had her ultrasound scan, which he had up on the hospital wall, and anyone who'd come in, he'd like talk to them about her. So it was very much front and center of his mind when he was in the hospital. I think there was a part of us that thought, well, you'll bounce back from this like you have with everything else. And I think there was a part of him and his brain that sort of protects protects them, is a protective factor as the brain starts to shut down, I think. So I guess, yeah, it all just happened at once,
My
which was,
goodness.
yeah,
Yeah.
intense,
Yeah.
I suppose is an understatement.
It is an understatement.
Yeah.
Effectively then, Annabelle, you became a widow and a mother in a very short
Yes.
space of time.
Yes.
So how did those two identities sit alongside each other? There must have
It
been a
was
lot
weird.
of confusion.
Yeah, I think for me, I was I look back and I have no regrets, which I think is a lovely thing to be able to say at this point. When Josh was in the hospital and in those 3 months, I was extremely present in those moments. I wasn't thinking about the what if, and I wasn't lamenting the past. I was just in those moments, in those days. I think being pregnant in that environment, here's a silver lining for you, helped me look after myself because I had to.
Yeah.
I think as carers, we run ourselves into the ground and think about ourselves last. I didn't do that because I had to look after myself and Prim. So there was that element. So I made sure I got sleep, the sleep that I needed, and eat and that kind of thing. And it was, and then I guess then after he died, I just had this unbelievable job to do. There was 2.5 months, as I said, like kind of in between
Yeah.
his death and Prim's birth. It was so weird because it was so close together that, like he was the same color after he died that she was when she came out. Kind of thing, because of like the oxygen, like or
Yes,
something.
yes.
It was just this like really weird. I mean, I'm not really a spiritual person, but I just had this complicated relationship with spirituality when you see all of this stuff happen. That's just almost magical. Like it's almost both phenomenons are almost magical. Like you've got this incredible full of life person that is just knows everything about Star Wars, and you can ask them any question about all sorts of different things, and incredibly learned and kind, and sort of remembers people's birthdays and stuff like that. Just completely disappear in 1 second. And then all of a sudden you've got somebody who has just appeared out of nowhere, well, out of yourself. It's kind of magic, which is, I don't know, I still can't really place it, I suppose, in reality.
That's an incredible juxtaposition of two lives, one
Yeah.
leaving and one arriving.
Yeah.
I haven't
And I
heard that
guess
described before.
There's this piece of me, again, like I was saying with Josh, like being curious and like, I mean, obviously wouldn't wish what happened to me to my worst enemy, but at the same time, how many people get to experience that power of spirituality and magic, and be able to sort of talk about it. I feel almost blessed to be able to have had these experiences with both Prim and Josh, who are two incredible humans. And I do feel a lot like they look so similar, the two of them. And I do feel a lot like she spent 2 months with him on some plane. Again, this is a non-spiritual person saying this, but I do feel like she came out sleeping perfectly, breastfeeding perfectly, being just this incredible team player. All the other mums in the hospital hated my guts because, I had no problems. I had a 6-hour labor. Like it was, a dream apart from everything else that had happened in my life. And then, anytime I'd go to breastfeeding classes or anything like that, I'd just nail it. Or, mums and bubs classes where she'd just patiently sleep through it or whatever. She was just a total team player, and it almost felt like she'd had a pep talk, which I always thought that in the back of my mind. So I don't know. It was just the timing is really exceptional, I suppose. I do feel grateful in the sense that, I mean, as much as I wish Josh and Prim had been able to meet each other, and both of them deserved that, for me, having the ability to fully focus on him and, everything that happened in the hospital, and then be able to have a beat to like turn and face the massive job that was in front of me was a protective factor for me. which is a bit selfish to say, but I think that allowed me to be able to go, right, I've got this unbelievable job to do and I'm just going to nail it.
Wow.
I didn't grieve, really, or I did, but not in the way that you would expect. That all came later because I had to be a mum.
Yeah, so you sort of shift that grief aside or whatever else and you focus,
Yeah.
like you said.
Yeah, yeah.
At that time, I mean, were there expectations about how you were meant to cope, or did people just see you kind of going about your business going, all right, she's got this?
Some of my friends, like Josh, the day after Josh died, I made all my friends go to a play. And then none of them wanted to go. And because I'd been in hospital for 3 months, basically. Like I hadn't gone out and done anything. And I was like, no, we're going to this play. And they still talk about it to this day. Like, we just remember all of us like looking at each other over the top of, or like behind you, just being like, what the fuck are we doing? So I did do sort of things like, I was very much like, again, everything's fine. I was really, really lucky in the sense that I've got this unbelievable support network. So my best friend, he broke lease with the place he was living and moved in with Prim and I. Look, he was a 20-something single dude. And I say this all love in my heart, and he genuinely did save us, but he was not useful. Practically. Emotionally, it was unbelievable to have him there. We had obviously a lot of mutual friends. We had this 2-story Victorian terrace that we were living in, and Prim and I sort of had the top floor. So it meant that I could, and we'd always have people around, and there was obviously lots of people that want, especially in the beginning, at the beginning. Everyone wants to come round and bring a lasagna or a bunch of flowers or whatever else. So we had a lot of that. And it was lovely because the house was, I look at those times as these vibrant, lots of life and lots of friends and lots of colour. I look back on those times and it's a beautiful memory. I had the safety of being able to retreat, but I also wasn't. I think if I was in a house all by myself with Prim, I think I would have really struggled with that. So to be able to have that experience, I suppose, saved me. And him and a lot of my other close friends, even to this day, stick with me and understand that grief is lifelong. The casseroles stopped coming after a while. The flowers all die and you have to throw them out, and people forget that grief takes a long time. And I think, like I said before, my grief came later. So by the time I really started grieving, everyone was kind of over it. Not everyone, not my close circle, but a lot of the sort of well-wishers had kind of moved on and the news cycle had moved on. So I think, but that at that time, I think everyone everyone was just astonished that I did anything, which was a lovely place to be in because it's nice to impress people. But I think everyone was just like, wow, you're here. That's amazing. Like, well done.
Nailed it. Exactly. Annabelle, sounds like you had quite the support network around you in terms of your friends, and as you say, that probably saved you. You also, though, had support through legacy because of the military connection. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So Josh died of brain cancer, and I was doing a lot of advocacy work and support work in the brain cancer space. And so we knew a lot of brain cancer, like people who had been diagnosed and the families who had been left behind and things. And also I was doing work within the military space. And so similarly, we had a lot of friends that had been through similar experiences in that space. I always felt so lucky because we had come from the military space, we had an organisation like Legacy for us, which people who haven't served don't have access to that community. And Legacy have been running for, I think it's 150 3 years or something like that now.
Wow.
And it's, all based off a promise that was made from, one mate to another to look after the missus and the kids. And I think it's probably a romanticized story now, but, that idea in the trenches where it's like, go home and look after the missus and the kids. And so Legacy's job is to do that, is to look after war widows and children of veterans. And so they were there for us, and really practical support too, putting Prim through daycare, giving us a cleaner to keep our house clean, and just like things like that, for Prim to go to daycare allowed me to get back to work. She only went a couple of days a week, but it gave me a little bit of independence, and, that was also essential for me for the building blocks of my life too. So I feel really grateful to have an organisation like that, but also a community, because I had family days and things like that. So through that I met other people who, like war widows that are, young.
Yeah.
Or, you have, when you say war widow, a certain type of person pops up in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of other people like me in this community, and the need still exists within our military community. There's war, like a contemporary veteran community, which means there's a contemporary family community. I was so lucky to have that access to those supports.
We've got First Light Widowed Support,
Yes.
as you're well aware, which is,
Yes.
has been created for young widows across Australia. But when
Yes.
you think about a specific group of people in terms of military families, how does it differ, or are there sort of uniquenesses to your stories that give you a bond?
Interesting. I think, look, I have actually, one of my widow friends who's a war widow went to Camp Widow and came back raving about it, which is how, I got to know about you guys and the work that you do. I think, it's really, I think they're pretty universal themes that we all experience in grief. I had a friend who was, he lost his husband to brain cancer and was part of our little community of friends. And he was very learned about grief. He would read a lot of grief books, and he'd tell me about what stage I was up to, and I was really annoyed because he was right, because there's this like really kind of universal process, but it feels so bloody, like it's like no one could. This is so personal to me. This is so, and he's like, no, what you're feeling is this, and blah 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 blah. And I was like, damn it, you're right. We all deal with it different ways, but I think there is something in. I've got a small group of friends who are war widows who we have similar age children, and I suppose that experience is. It's lovely to have that similarity of experience. So I think that's important to me. But I also think that whenever you meet another widow, regardless of the circumstances of the death or whatever else, you just find so much similarity and so much kinship, and that peer support that you get from that community is second to none, to be honest.
It's a real deep understanding, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like you just get it.
Yeah. No more needs to be said somehow.
No,
in many ways.
Exactly.
So advocacy has become a really big part of you, and I guess you're healing in some ways, or did that come from somewhere else?
Look, I think I've always been the type of person that wants to leave the world a little better than how I found it. So that's always been part of my story, I guess. When Josh died, like I said, I'd been working in brain cancer advocacy. And when he died, I knocked on the door of the Department of Veterans Affairs expecting, that they would now support me as a war widow. And the legislation didn't agree. Computer said no, and DVA were like, sorry, we can't help you. Which is why legacy was so fundamentally important at that time. But I was just shocked, because I was like, people would expect our Department of Veterans Affairs to support people like me. That's just what the expectation is. We're taxpayers, we pay our money, we take pride in service. We understand that the families support the service, and a family is impacted by a service death or whatever else. And so that kind of made me wake up to a whole other gap in the way that, we look at veteran families. My assumption of how they were supported was not the way that the legislation, that wasn't reflected in legislation. And so that really changed my trajectory, I suppose, in that I just became a pain in the ass to the government.
Excellent.
And used my advocacy skills in that capacity. I ended up working for Legacy, and that was my real vehicle. And now I'm the Commissioner for Veteran Families. So I think eventually they just gave up and gave me a job because I was being a pain in the ass anyway. They might as well have me in the tent. But no, I think it's honestly been an unbelievable joy and privilege to be able to represent veteran families at a legislative and policy level. I get to go around the country and meet other families like mine, families not like mine that are dealing with different issues, and then take those issues back into the department and into government and find solutions for that, because we have so many families slipping through the cracks. And, a lot of these institutions were built back when families looked like a 1950s vacuum cleaner commercial. And now we look like just so diverse and complex. It's just not funny. Like it's every type of, family dynamic you can think of. That's what exists.
Yeah.
And so that's been an unbelievable joy and privilege, like I say. And I think, for me, I've already seen a lot of success in that. It was a little bit of mental gymnastics to start working for the organisation that was responsible for so much extra unnecessary heartache at a time when I just needed somebody to step in and hold my circumstances. But having said that, I think, I watched, that was 8 years ago, and I've watched over the last 8 years, and especially over the last 2 to 3 years, this organisation or DVA go through such a big shift in the way that it looks at families. So I really feel like I'm pushing on an open door. And there are well-meaning people that work within this organisation. So I felt like it was the time to jump in.
Absolutely. Annabelle, you mentioned a short while ago about the gaps that you encountered when you were trying to navigate support. How then, as Veteran Family Commissioner, how then do you, you're about creating systemic change. So what are the biggest shifts that you're trying to make right now, I guess, to fill those gaps that you experienced?
Legislative reform.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about actually changing the law, which takes a long time. I'm still pushing. We had a Royal Commission within our community a couple of years ago. One of the recommendations was, and it wasn't just me pushing for it, obviously, it was a community push, but one of the recommendations specifically spoke to the gap that people like me were experiencing, in the sense that being able to prove that, a certain illnesses are related to service. Sometimes that's really difficult when something like brain cancer, where you don't know what's caused it. So there was a recommendation specifically on that, and that's been something we've been pushing for, to see into legislation. I mean, the other thing that's happened, obviously, is me getting involved in this community. Like I said, I've seen so many different issues and things. So I'm now fighting for a whole bunch of other things as well. Some things like program change, policy reform, maybe don't take as long. Legislative reform takes a long time. But I'm in it for the long haul, so
we can take big heart in that. So how for you, and this is kind of an interesting question for anyone who's gone through something themselves, but how do you balance lived experience with the responsibility of influencing national reforms, national policy?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between lived experience and lived expertise, and it's really important to navigate that line. I use my experiences as a lens to connect with others rather than have the blinkers on to only change my thing. I'll be here long after my stuff's done. And you just want to make sure that you're making the world a better place for everyone else that's experienced something similar to yours. So, and I think the other thing too is recognizing when you just have to put your tools down and try something else or leave it, because otherwise you risk. I attribute a lot of this to my post-traumatic growth and recovery. This is the way I've handled my grief, and I know that very clearly, that this has been a huge part of my healing, is to make sure that no other family experiences what I did. But that's not for everyone as well. And there was a lot of times throughout this process where I was like, somebody else would give up here, and there's no judgment in that. And if I give up here, I don't judge myself either. Sometimes it turns around and it becomes something that's re-traumatizing yourself or picking at a wound, and that's okay to not do that as well.
Annabelle, you're working hard to change things. What gives you hope when you look at the system, at the workload ahead, but for the future for veteran families? What does that look like for you, when you've completed some of the things that you hope to do?
Gosh, what a question. It's been a real interesting journey in the sense that, you turn over a stone and there's a whole bunch of other issues that you're like, whoa, I've got to deal with this now. And so, my finish line was always the ledge reform that got me across the line. And now I've got this role, and I know that this role will be much longer than that one sort of piece of success. I guess what I want to see is parity for veteran families with any Australian family, and parity for veteran children with any Australian child. I want to address the disadvantage that families experience in service life, especially children, because children, I often say conscription exists in this country because our children don't have a choice, and they're impacted by service. And in some cases, grandchildren, we don't fully know the impacts of Agent Orange even on our grandchildren, on grandchildren of Vietnam veterans anymore, and things like that. So I think, all I want to see is the disadvantage in service families addressed, so that there is parity across the board. I do see that being I do see that being able to happen. It just takes curiosity and creativity within policy and legislation, understanding what levers to pull, and just time and just persistency. Persistency isn't a word. Being persistent. I think I mixed persistent and consistency then.
I've only been talking to you for just under an hour, and I reckon you've got both of those in spades. So look out.
Consistency. There you go. I've also made up a word too to boot.
I do that all the time. I'd like to just talk a little bit about Primrose. Now, am I right that she is 8?
Yes.
Now?
Yes.
Those 8 years for you sounds like, I imagine, a mixture of all sorts of things, not least coming to terms with your situation, but this daughter who never quite got in reality to meet her father. How have you, I guess, navigated that?
Yeah, I look, it's interesting. I hear my other friends talk about their kids and their relationship with parenting, and I think parenting is just bloody hard, no matter what your circumstances are. I feel like I feel almost lucky that she was my first, and so I had nothing to compare it to. I found it really hard, obviously, when she was little. I did have why me moments, especially, in the wee hours of the morning when you're breastfeeding and you're lonely and you have to do every single thing, every single feed or every single nappy change, and you sort of think, well, everyone else gets a partner and everyone else gets the normal life. Why me? But as she's grown, actually from the start, she's been such a team player. She's been part of this grief journey with me, and it's been us girls against the world, really. It's one of those things that I think has gone fast. I think any parent would say that too. It's like, I can't believe she's 8. I think we've been through stages where, especially as she started to become cognizant of what happened, and learning how to talk to her about that. And that's where the peer support and other friends that have been, especially my other war widow friends and things who are maybe have slightly older kids or whatever else, where that becomes really useful to me. But I have always talked about Josh with her. We live near the cemetery, so we go down there quite often. We have photos of him around the house. He's present in our lives, and especially on things like Remembrance Day and Anzac Day, she'll wear his medals and we'll talk about him. We're lucky that we've got friends and family. Like, he was so loved and such a big, wonderful personality that everyone's got a story. So she'll always ask people their stories, and they're always really happy to share them. I think it's been probably very different than other parenting journeys, but at the same time, all of our journeys are complex and tough in different ways.
So true. So true. For you, what does connection look like with Josh now? And I wonder if your relationship and closeness to the veteran community and in the role that you have as commissioner, whether that kind of almost emboldens that connection in some ways?
Yeah, it's interesting. And reporters ask me all the time when I do interviews, like, do you think he'd be proud? And I was like, he wasn't really a prescriptive person. He would be happy if I'm happy. He's like, he'd be like, are you happy doing what you're doing? And I'd say yes. And he'd be like, fabulous. And I'm supportive. I think it's definitely helped me understand his military service a lot better. He would wear his medals on Anzac Day, and I'd always ask him what they meant, and he'd tell me, but I don't know, it would go in one ear and out the other. And I guess, understanding what his military career looked like and how sort of decorated it was, and how influential it was, and how much he managed to achieve in such a short space of time. That's something that I suppose didn't realise, how incredible he was at his job. I think, like anyone who's been through grief knows, although my friend who's very learned will tell you that this is all in the textbook, it's sort of all over the place. It's not like a one clear trajectory line out. Where you feel a little better every day. You start to feel better, and then all of a sudden you crash out, or something triggers you. You sort of don't think about, as time goes on, maybe you don't think about it for a couple of days, and then all of a sudden it all heaps on you, or you really, there's been moments even recently where I just miss him so much that I have to sit down and have a bit of a cry. I think it's one of those, the thing where I really realize it is when something amazing happens to me, and you ring your parents, and you ring, you tell all the people that are important to you, and I just always feel like I've forgotten somebody, and it's because I haven't told him. Yeah. We do go, as I said, and visit the cemetery, go and visit where he's buried a bit, but I don't feel spiritually, I don't know, I sort of don't feel like I'm telling him necessarily. That's not the way that it feels for me. So, I think, I would love him to know what I'm doing, but at the same time, I sort of then look at this and go, well, aren't I just grateful that I would be happy to know? Like, I think he'd be really happy to know what I'm doing, and be really excited. And at least I'm not like, ooh, I'm glad he can't see me now, He'd be so proud of my relationship with his parents. He'd be so proud of the way that I've brought Prim up. He'd be so proud of the job that I'm doing. And it's lovely for me to know that.
Absolutely. And lovely for you to be able to say that out loud, because it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. What do you like to do to remember Josh?
Look at Prim. that sounds really. That I'm almost making myself cry. She is a spitting image of him. She looks and acts like him, which is annoying because I did all the work. She is just his representative on earth, and I think look at her. I think spend time with his family, spend time especially with his Air Force mates, but his other mates too. I like to be with the people he left me with, because he left me with some of the best people in the world.
What a gift. What an absolute gift. What's something, and you would come across people all the time, but what is something that you say to someone who's newly widowed?
I asked you before if I could swear. I was thinking about this question because I know you'd said you were going to ask me this one, and I think I went down this rabbit hole, so just bear with me on this. I'm repartnered, and I met my boyfriend a couple of years ago, and I remember we went out for brunch, and he knew I had a kid, but he didn't know my circumstances, and I said to him, Prim's dad, and he was like, yeah. I'm like, he died 18 months ago, and he just goes, oh, shit. And it was amazing because I didn't see the pity in his eyes. No, he didn't say, oh, I'm so sorry. It was like there wasn't that sort of, I don't know, affected. I don't know, when people say to me, I'm so sorry, I'm like, what, did you kill him? Like, why are you apologizing?
Yeah.
I felt like there was just this like, fuck, that's fucked. It was just amazingly honest and real. And I think when I thought about this, I was like, what would I say to someone that's newly widowed? I'd probably just be like, oh shit, because it's true. It's a club that you don't wish on anybody, but it's one of the most incredible clubs to be a part of. And the road is bloody tough, but I'm in awe of the people that have been through what we've been through.
Could not have said it more beautifully myself, expletive included. My final question to you is whether there's a quote that resonates with you most at this point in your journey.
Yeah, I recently got a neon sign made up, and it says, what if it all works out? I've lived in this state of catastrophe, which many people who have been widowed in highly traumatic circumstances in particular will understand, where you just sort of lose faith in the universe. You kind of go with the what if of like, what if this happens and what if the worst happens and all of that. And there was at one point in my whole journey where I just started saying to myself, or what if it all works out? And let's work backwards from it working out and see what happens, which is the place that Josh and I were in at the beginning. And when I was talking at the beginning, we were kind of like, well, we'll work backwards from the yes. And so so I recently actually had that made up, and it's in my house, because I always want to try and remind myself to live in that space of yes, and kind of just rewire my brain to trust the universe again and look at this, what if it all works out situation.
Wow.
Yeah.
And to circle back to the start of when we spoke, that's
You're welcome.
That's
I know, as soon as I was like, yeah.
You've done this
Nailed
before. That is optimistically realistic, or realistically optimistic.
Exactly.
Well
yes.
done. That's amazing. Annabelle,
Yeah.
what an absolute treat to speak to you.
Thank you.
You bring levity.
Likewise.
Thank you. You bring levity and realism to the toughest of experiences. And wow, I think that the veteran family community is in bloody good hands.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity to chat.
My pleasure. Thank you to all my guests for sharing their stories so generously. The Widow Diaries is hosted and produced by me, Caroline Winter, from Pod Talk for First Light Widowed Support, which provides information, resources and connection for young widowed people throughout Australia. Follow or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. And you can also find out more information at firstlight.org.au. This podcast acknowledges and celebrates the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which stories have been told for thousands of years and on which this podcast is recorded.